Okay, so thanks, Ted. Corrupted by Fear is a book. It's a bestseller on Amazon. Sold three and a half thousand copies in the past year and a bit, which doesn't sound like a lot, but considering that it's a narrow niche book about Canadian politics and Canadian law, so within that context, 3,500 is a bestseller. I mean, if it was a Harlequin romance or a psychology book or something, 3.5 is nothing to write home about. 3,500, but in a small niche. And so yeah, I go through the collapse of democracy in Germany. There are lessons to be learned.
Mm.
Uh, you know, I think it's important to get reminded of some of this history and how politicians used fear to acquire power, to hang on to power. The National Socialists in Germany for 12 years kept all the Germans in a perpetual state of fear of communism and the Jews, both. And everybody's scared of communism. And this helps the government to maintain power, violate rights and freedoms because everybody's terrified. And so terrified people need a savior. And so a government comes along and says, I'm the savior. So trust us. We'll take away your rights and freedoms. We're going to look after you. We're going to protect you from the bad guys. And that's a common theme that you see all the time, right? We have governments today that want to protect us from disinformation, protect us from hatred, protect us from misinformation, protect our cybersecurity system from attackers by giving this is Bill C8, by giving cabinet ministers the power to kick Canadians off the internet without notice or warning. I don't know, probably worse than getting your bank account frozen, I think. If the government orders your internet provider to no longer provide the internet to Ted or John or Roger or whoever. So there's lessons to be learned from history. And so the first 2 or 3 chapters are on the People's Court and the National Socialists. And by the way, the National Socialists in Germany were very big on following the science, right? The science is settled. It's about murdering handicapped people and sterilizing people with illnesses so they can't reproduce. That is the science. There's the science of the different races. Scientists have established beyond any doubt that there are different races and there is a hierarchy of superior and inferior races. This was the science that was not to be questioned. So even there, you can see in history, previous governments, the in South Africa under apartheid, there was also some of this science of the different races, and races are all different and they shouldn't mix. And this is scientific. This is the science that you need to follow. So yeah, lots to be learned from history. I go through Canadian court rulings, how they give you 2 examples. Manitoba case, Gateway Bible Baptist Church and a whole bunch of other applicants sued for the removal of the lockdowns in Manitoba. We received a very lengthy judgment, 367 paragraphs. It's the size of a short book. And the judge goes on and on and on. But some interesting things. He makes declarations in his court ruling that he's obviously just parroting the media. He says in his court ruling that COVID is it's the worst pandemic in over a century. Well, there's no evidence before the court to support that. And in fact, anybody who's done their homework, done a little bit of research, will know that the Asian flu of 1957 was more deadly than COVID. And the Hong Kong flu of 1968 was more deadly than COVID. And here you've got a court ruling. The judge asserts, without any supporting evidence whatsoever, but because he's heard it on the CBC thousands of times, the judge writes into his court ruling, COVID is the worst pandemic in over a century, which is not true. The judge, deliberately makes no reference to a very compelling expert report that was submitted by the applicants. This was the expert report of Dr. Joel Kettner, who was a former chief medical officer of Manitoba. He wrote an expert report for the applicants, who's like the Justice Center clients, and absolutely eviscerated the government's case for lockdowns. He went through the PCR testing and how it doesn't diagnose, and how the government's numbers are misleading, about how the World Health Organization changed the cause of death classification protocol in April 2020. So, the threat of COVID is exaggerated. The government's not paying any attention to lockdowns. The government's making all kinds of assertions that are not supported by evidence. Dr. Joel Kettner's paper eviscerates the case for lockdowns, just makes mincemeat of it. Now, it would have been open to the judge to explain why he disagreed with Dr. Joel Kettner's report and why he's accepting the evidence in Manitoba. That would have been legitimate. Okay. Not an outcome I would have liked, but it would have been legitimate. What does the judge do? Completely ignores Joel Kettner's expert report. You can go through 367 pages, and this is one of the main pieces of evidence that the applicants put forward. Judge completely ignores it, doesn't mention it in his ruling, does not mention it. He also does not explain in his ruling why he is accepting the Manitoba government's evidence rather than the evidence of the applicants. Again, he's entitled as a judge. It's legitimate. He can rule whichever way he wants. But if he's going to reject the evidence of the applicants and accept the evidence of the Manitoba government, he owes it to the rule of law and to the litigants before him. He owes them an explanation as to why he felt or believed that Manitoba's evidence was better or stronger. An explanation. None is provided. He outlines the Manitoba government's evidence. He outlines the evidence of the applicants, minus Joel Kettner's report, but he doesn't say why he's ruling for Manitoba. He just says over and over again in his ruling, he says, well, Manitoba government's evidence, it was stronger, it was better, it was more persuasive. He never says how or why. He just says, they got better evidence, so I'm ruling for Manitoba. No explanation given as to why that evidence was chosen. That's typical. We also had a case in Ontario and Alberta where a judge said, I am neither equipped nor inclined to resolve scientific controversies regarding COVID-19. It's like, really? But you should resign your position as a judge, because your position as a judge is to resolve scientific controversies in many cases. If you've got a injured patient is suing the doctor for negligence, the judge is probably not a medical doctor. There might be one or two on the bench, but I'd venture a guess 99% of judges are not medical doctors. And yet you have to issue a ruling either in favor of the patient who says that the doctor was negligent, or you rule in favor of the doctor who's saying, no, I wasn't negligent at all. The judge might have to listen to two competing expert reports, and the judge, who is not a doctor, has to make a decision. So for a judge to say, I'm neither equipped nor inclined to resolve scientific controversies regarding COVID-19 is a total and disgusting abdication of responsibility. On the positive note, and I'm not going to read through these, but the last chapter, or one of the last ones, chapter 18, Solutions, 12 Things Canadians Can Do Immediately. That's at page 249. But it's things like be engaged in the democratic process, exercise your charter rights and freedoms, make sure your children get a good education, which probably means pulling them out of public schools where they're getting indoctrinated on a daily basis into all kinds of garbage and they're not being taught to think. Anyway, that's in the book. So it's available on Amazon, Amazon.ca, Corrupted by Fear, and brief update on bills. Bill C9 passed. I'm not going to dwell on it too much. It is a small step. Not a big step. It's a small step towards becoming more like the United Kingdom. It removes protection for religious speech being subjected to a hate speech prosecution. So in other words, with Bill C9, well, it's before the Senate. The Senate will probably pass it, I assume. With the passage of Bill C9, it means that if a Catholic priest or Orthodox Jewish rabbi or an evangelical pastor or a Muslim imam, if they preach what their scriptures say about homosexuality, they could potentially face a hate speech prosecution. So that's not good. A lot of it is duplicative rhetoric. You know, the Bill C9 talks about facilitating safe access to houses of worship. because apparently, according to media reports, and I assume that they're accurate on this point, that or sorry, with all the problems, attacks on synagogues, right? So the government's saying we need to ensure safe passage to access to houses of worship. So we're going to criminalize interfering with accessing house of worship. Sounds wonderful, except the laws are already on the books. We see this a lot in Ottawa. Something's illegal. The Online Harms Act, okay? It's already illegal right now. It's criminal code offense to revenge porn, to threaten somebody with distributing a naked photograph, to take naked photographs of kids, child pornography, bullying, intimidation, uttering threats. There's all these criminal laws that are currently in existence that make it illegal to harm a child on the internet. Now, maybe we need better enforcement, and certainly there are some parents who need to do a far better job of stepping up to the plate and restricting access. I'm all in favor of censorship, but not the government, but parents should be actively censoring what their kids are getting exposed to on a daily basis rather than, here's your phone, have fun. So Bill C9 has these provisions to, supposedly make it illegal to obstruct access to a house of worship. That's already illegal under the criminal code. It's already illegal to interfere with the lawful use and enjoyment of property. If I physically block you from going into your synagogue, if I threaten you, uttering threats is a criminal code offense. If I block you from getting into your own house or your car, that's a criminal code offense. Okay. Last point, Bill C-22. This is, I'm expecting, I just wrote a column. I was up late last night. Hopefully will get published in the days ahead, perhaps in the Epoch Times or the Western Standard. We'll see. Bill C-22 is a big step towards the surveillance state, which nobody admits to being in favor of it. But when you look at the laws that are coming down, you look at Bill C-8, Cybersecurity Act, you look at Bill C-2, which is now on the back burner. You look at Bill C-22, which is very much on the front burner. You can see that there are people, and maybe they're stupid, maybe they don't know that they're taking us towards the surveillance state. I don't know. I try not to guess what's inside people's minds or hearts, but certainly the legislation on the face of it, these are the building blocks for a totalitarian control like what you have in communist China. The social credit system, if you criticize the government on Facebook, you're going to be finding it unable to get onto a train or a plane or a bus or a subway. So, Bill C-22, we have a petition on our website, and I don't know where my time is at, but I think I would just want to stop right there, if that's all right. And happy to answer any questions that people have on what I said or other topics. I'll do the best I can. If I don't know the answer, I'll just say I don't know.
Well, and I appreciate, John, you have to be somewhat careful with your words when we're having these public conversations, but I would suggest that this government knows exactly what it's doing. It is building the totalitarian state. As you said, many of the laws to protect our safety are already in place. And so this flurry of legislative activity that's happening at the federal level all seems to have a similar theme to it of control, censorship, and restricting our ability to think independently from whatever the government wants us to think. I think we're in a very challenging time here in this history of Canada. For me, when I read your book, John, the opening chapters where you described the situation in Nazi Germany before Hitler and then how things changed under Hitler was rather disturbing because you can see the exact same script here in Canada playing itself out. And if we have any illusion that we couldn't have a Hitler in this country, I would suggest that your book helps to dispel that illusion. I guess my question for you is, and maybe it's not a fair question, but I said earlier in our meeting today is that I've lost my confidence that our courts are there to serve humanity. I think that they now have a different master. And if anything, I'm concerned that we keep looking to it as our salvation, and I'm increasingly um, uh, uh, um, I don't see them as the answer to reclaiming our rights and freedoms. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Okay. Going to court should always be plan B. Plan A is change the culture because law follows politics, politics follows culture, culture generally follows education. And I use the word education broadly, so that would include what our kids are getting taught from kindergarten up to and including university, but also education in the broader sense of what is in people's hearts and minds. You know, when I think back to Canada before the charter was added to our constitution in 1982. Prior to 1982, everybody in Canada understood that a man is innocent until proven guilty, and that the onus was on the Crown to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the accused person had, in fact, committed the crime and intended to commit the crime. You have a right to unbiased, impartial judge. You have a right to due process. Everybody understood this. Every lawyer, every judge, police officer, Crown prosecutor, and the general public. We all know a man's innocent until proven guilty. There is an example of something that was just ingrained in the culture. Everybody understood that you had free speech. And if somebody else said something vile or disgusting, evil, false, you could say to that person, shame on you, you know, what you're saying is it's vile and it's disgusting and it's evil. We didn't have this notion that you could just silence somebody because you strongly disagreed with what they were saying. So that was the culture. So education is kind of the bedrock or the soil. Uh, you have education is the soil, and then you get culture growing out of the soil, and then culture shapes politics, politics shapes laws. So priority number one, big project, it's going to take years and decades, is to change the culture. Cultural change where we understand and appreciate freedom and human rights and the fact that government must respect our human rights and our human dignity, that government cannot be the surveillance state, that it cannot uh, violate our rights and freedoms. That culture has to permeate. And once that culture is improved over where it is today, it's going to trickle up into the law schools and the courts and the judges. Okay. So courts are plan B. Courts are there when you've got a terrible law that's passed that shouldn't have passed in the first place. So the real problem, the number one problem, is the rotten culture that produces bad laws. Now you go to court, and yeah, Ted, I have to agree with you 100%. There's been a decline. There's an awful lot of woke, progressive, equity, diversity, inclusion ideologues that have been appointed to the courts. Didn't start with Trudeau. Harper appointed Chief Justice Wagner to the Supreme Court of Canada. So even Harper did, on the whole, did a terrible job. He appointed a few good judges, but Harper did a terrible job. So going to court is always plan B. Plan A has to be to elect freedom-minded people federally, provincially, municipally, and to the school board.
Good thoughts. Thank you. Lots of hands. Don.
Yes, good morning, everyone. First of all, I certainly appreciate the work that the Justice Centers does, and you're to be commended for much
Thank
of
you.
it. I do have a couple of comments where I think I might disagree somewhat with your views. And I'd like to relate that back to the initial conversation in this meeting about what is to be done. Charles raised the issue of principles. And one of the principles that tends to be bandied about in Canada is the rule of law. And I think much of what you've said shows that a principle of the rule of law is inherently flawed. One area, for instance, where I disagree with your conclusion that judges should rule on scientific uh, controversy, is that the problem is not that judges are the problem. Real problem is that it's deemed appropriate for the government to uh, impose cures or on individuals in the population. So if the government does not have the right to impose a medical technology against your will, that's the real problem. And if we accepted that, the judge would not have to decide whether vaccinations are good or bad, or the government is right or wrong. So that is an example where we've gotten off track. Another problem I have with the issue around Bill C-9 is it's often characterized as a religious defense issue being taken away. The problem is that if the religious defense exists, you have different rights for different groups of people. If I say X as a Christian, that would be okay. But if I say X as an atheist, that's a hate crime. And the real problem is, does government have any business interfering with hate? It doesn't. And so the real principles involved are being ignored, and we're fighting over the implications of accepting the role of government as mitigating hate. And now we say, well, this is okay, but that's not okay. And of course, eventually, more and more restrictions apply in this area. So we have to get back to first principles and figure out what those first principles really are. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. I agree with your comments, and the hate speech laws that are now on the books are quite arbitrary because it's perfectly legal to willfully promote hatred against bankers, lawyers, doctors, psychologists, wealthy people, landowners, factory owners, people who didn't get injected with the COVID vaccine back in 2021. There is a long, 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 long list of people that you can promote hatred against, or groups that you can promote hatred against, and that's fine. But then all of a sudden, if you promote hatred against somebody because of their skin color, religion, sexual orientation, then that's a criminal code offense. It is rather arbitrary. So I agree, like we need to figure out what our first principles are and return to those. And I also agree, I don't think government really should be in the business of trying to manage or control hate, which is an emotion. The government should punish, things like murder and theft and rape and fraud, and things that obviously are harming other people. But whether I've got hatred in my heart or not, it shouldn't really be the government's concern.
Wayne, what are your thoughts, questions?
Yeah, more along the lines of questions. And thanks, John, for everything that you do. I have read just about everything that you've got on your website. I shared materials, and I continue to do that. And I'm actually going to get a copy of your most recent book as well. What we started out this meeting with was the question basically that Ted posed to us, what can I do differently? And it was actually kind of disheartening to hear that judges are abdicating their responsibility. They're not providing reasons why they're making the decisions that they're making. And you mentioned one thing there that I think is pretty important in terms of a solution, which is continuing to exercise our democratic freedoms. So, in that vein, I've been trying to engage and educate not just my neighbors, but the media, institutions, and most importantly, I think the elected officials. And what seems like to be on a daily basis or at least weekly. But that leads me to, I guess it's kind of a multi-pronged question. And, I'm wondering how much are we really shifting the Overton window overall? And the other one relates to the National Citizens Inquiry. And the reason I bring that up is from the elected officials that I've spoken with, I think they're scared of it. I think there's a genuine fear on the part of a lot of them that they don't want to acknowledge it. And in my mind, it's as close to this thing that we once had called a grand jury. So, how can we get that stuff back where, I think we all have a certain set of shared values that we believe in, like don't cheat, don't lie, don't steal, take care of your neighbors, that kind of thing, or treat them the way you want to be treated. But, how do we get this, these, how do we get I guess the infrastructure or the framework back so we can actually exercise things like those principles?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted, the 140 or so, if I counted correctly, the 140 or so people on this call, you are probably a little bit different from the average Canadian in the sense of you are alert and aware and engaged and active and so on and so forth. I think the biggest thing is just to cultivate the virtue of perseverance, to keep on going, because the cultural change, right, that I want to see permeate the into the medical system, into the healthcare system, into the freedom of choice for natural health products, good work that is being done there by Sean Buckley and others, but to get that cultural change into the legal system, the universities, so on and so forth, we have to take a long view and just keep on going. The other thing is we never know, or we generally don't know the positive impacts of doing good things like speaking truth to power, taking action, setting up a website, forwarding a newsletter, handing out some flyers on a street corner, attending a meeting. You never know with certainty what the positive impacts are, but the positive impacts are there all the time, right? You hear stories. It's like, oh yeah, and then I saw this, I heard this, that got me thinking about that. So there's all these spin-off effects, and we have to believe, because it's true, we have to believe that the little things that we're doing to promote truth and justice and freedom are making a difference, and I really think they are. So sorry it's a very broad question you've asked, but I think the important thing is to cultivate perseverance, to not give up and quit, to keep on going for years and for decades.
That's good, but I guess I'm back to this grand jury idea, and
Hmm.
like the NCI again is as close as we've got to it, and I know that they are shifting the Overton window because people are sharing that information quite very frequently, probably far more than I would ever know. But how can we get that sort of institution back, which is sort of like a parallel institution to what we've currently got, that can actually hold those institutions to account?
No, fair question. I don't know the answer. I'd have to study up on grand juries and what they are and where they are and how they've worked. Like, I'm totally ignorant to the topic, so I better not respond. But I'm making a note of that to study up on it. And I think I'm a big fan of NCI. I'm so grateful that for all the people that have gotten that together and organized it and funded it. I think NCI is great.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Wayne. Bob?
Well, John, I met you on the plane coming out of Calgary some time ago. Gave you my story to read. I bet you haven't got it in your mind.
I'm sure it's at the top of his mind, Bob.
Yeah, yeah. No, because you were busy reading a paper and you handed it back to me after you read it. So I guess the paper's still in your mind. And I'm glad that you agreed with what you read in the paper and not my story. Anyway, John, where do you fit in now? You are no use to anybody on the planet anymore. Would you
Okay.
agree? Would you agree?
No.
But now, well, can you tell me if you go to court and the judge makes a decision which is a lie, and you haven't got the ability to bring that judge to court to prove the truth of what he said, then you are of no use to anyone.
Well,
Yeah, I get your point. I get the point that you're making, and I would say that what we need to do as Canadians, as citizens, as human beings is we need to use all available channels. Okay, so you've got people. For example, we got the democratic process. Our democracy is so imperfect. I agree with Winston Churchill, who said, "Democracy is the worst system, except for all the others that are worse. And or democracy is terrible, except for all the other systems which are worse. So we have an imperfect democracy, and it's our responsibility to be engaged in that. We also have a court system in Canada where since 1982, we've had this charter. And so it's important to make use of it to hold governments to account. We have an awful lot of success. I could talk for 3 hours straight on all the
Yeah,
successes.
okay, I'm
The
just going to
Justice
say
Center,
I'm going to
yeah.
leave now. Yeah, but you don't hours. We've been talking for 5 years, and I've been doing it for 14 friggin' years. So I just want to see some action from people like you, or turn your shingle in.
All right, thanks, Bob.
Right.
Angel, what have you got for John?
You gotta unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Angel?
Okay, am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So John, thank you. This book sounds really interesting. I would like to get a copy. Can we order it online? And what is your website? I see all kinds of hands. I have a lot to say. Actually, I have quite a bit to say towards Wayne and the grand juries. But I guess this time right now is just to be focused on Mr. Carpay.
Yes.
Okay. So can we get that book online? The Corrupted by Fear, and what's
Yes.
your website?
Yeah. So the book Corrupted by Fear, it's on Amazon, and so Amazon.ca, it's $25, and the Justice Center website is Justice Center Constitutional Freedoms, JCCF, Justice Center Constitutional Freedoms, JCCF.ca. And anybody that wants to, if we've got a newsletter that goes out once or twice a month, you can subscribe to that. And our website has all kinds of studies and reports. And we just released a report 4 days ago on why we should abolish the CRTC, for example. So there's a ton of info on our website on stuff.
Oh, great. And you have a girl on YouTube too, who follows cases, right? I forget her name right now.
We do have, like, our staff lawyers. We've got a team of lawyers taking on cases all over Canada. So Alison Pajovic is she's based in Calgary, and James Manson's based in Toronto. Marty Moore is based in Calgary. So we've got a dozen or so lawyers and paralegals across Canada that are taking on dozens of cases.
John, how many cases do you think you've done in the last 5 years through the JCCF? Just
hundreds and hundreds for sure. That's a good question. Maybe we're up to 1,000. Like, if we included all the closed cases that are concluded, as well as the active ones, I'm going to talk to my litigation director to see if it's more than 1,000, but it could be up towards 1,000 cases in the past 15 years.
be interesting to know.
Can I just take 1 minute and talk to Wayne about his question on the
What Angel? How
I got 4 minutes. I got about 4 minutes left before I need to leave.
Yeah, let's save that for next week. We can have a conversation about grand juries.
Okay.
Thank you. Kathleen, what are your thoughts?
I can't wait to read your book. I look forward to that. And I just got your website, so I'll be diving into that. I take a different approach. I am a contract specialist of over 30 years working in corporate. And so, and I stood up successfully to Pfizer using natural law and divine law and getting other people to step down and everything with that. So when you said culture is how we change, that's exactly what I teach. And so I'm more interested in what would be the first steps for someone like me and those here to take as far as getting that culture out there, teaching it differently, getting it into the schools and universities. And I would be happy to teach it into law schools, what I teach, because it is more of the equity, divine law, and natural law, and bringing that back to focus, because judges do need to be held accountable. And this is more in an equity, Magna Carta type realm. But starting with the culture is what I'm interested in. So I know you don't have much time. What would be your suggestion for the most important focus to start on?
Well, keep on doing what you're doing. Keep on speaking keep on making your message as understandable as possible by people, right? Which is like a daily challenge that I struggle with, that everybody struggles with, right? You've got all this stuff in your head and you know it's right and you know it's true, but you just got to do the best you can to speak it out in a way that people can understand. So it's just, keep on going with your whatever you're doing now. And I would say that to everybody on the call, right? And for my own benefit too. Keep on writing and speaking and promoting and distributing.
Where
Just
the
keep on
fuck
going.
is it now?
Pat, have you got a question for John?
Yes, and it's real quick. It concerns the principle of no one is above the law. So I'm wondering if the provisions of Bill C9 and any subsequent anti-hate legislation could be brought against the government.
Well, it's a good question. It gets back to the arbitrariness, right? If I want to promote hatred against Canadians who didn't get injected in 2021, I can go ahead and do that. But if I want to promote hatred against somebody because of their religion or skin color, I can be criminally prosecuted. It's arbitrary. And yeah.
I'm going to suggest that that's only because we accept that. So what if somebody brought a charge against, let's say, Justin Trudeau, who says things like, do we tolerate these people?
I'm not aware of how ordinary citizens could go about laying charges. I mean, there is a procedure that I'm not familiar with but it's like, if police aren't doing it, I'm not sure what citizens can do other than
So
advocate
it's
for
baked
changes to the
into our
law.
system that the government's above the law, then would that be a correct understanding that it's baked in? The government is above the law. Is that baked in?
Well, under our constitution, government is not above the law, which is why governments get sued every day and they don't always win, right? So you got the federal, provincial, municipal governments that get sued, and courts. Unfortunately, during the lockdowns and vaccine mandates, the courts gave government a free pass and basically, wrongfully approved of all these horrible measures. So the government's won victories during the lockdown times, right? But there's dozens, probably hundreds of examples of governments that have lost court cases. So they're not above the law. They can be sued, and they sometimes lose.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Charles.
Thank you, John. I too really appreciate what you have been doing, you and your group. I'd like to come to something that you said earlier on, which is that prior to 1982, the Charter, everyone knew certain principles. They all understood. And now they don't. And we've got a number of laws that undermine those principles. And it's maybe because of the reading of the Charter or the ignoring of words in the Charter or the interpreting them differently. But we have really made a massive shift in the basic understanding that people have of what their rights are and what the duties of government are. And I would venture that when you win a case, the most likely thing that will happen in government is they'll change the rules to make sure you can't win the case next time. So it's more. I guess I'm really raising the question of how does one get back to the place where everyone knows what they knew prior to 1982 about what applied?
Short answer is just persevere in fighting for that cultural change, continue to educate ourselves, educate other people, do the best we can. It's frustrating sometimes, right? People are like, la, 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 la. I know that lockdown saved lives and they were totally necessary. So get lost. I don't want to talk about it, but I have to run. Because I've got this other appointment, so I need to leave now. But I want to say it's a real honor for me to be with you. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm happy to come back again in the future. And continue on with the conversation. So thank you very much for having me with you this morning. I consider it a great honor, and have a great rest of the day.